So you may get a little thingy asking you if that's okay. And we are going to go ahead and jump in. We're a couple of minutes over and we have a lot to say. So we'll go ahead and start. Welcome again. We're glad that you are both here. My name is Nora Vines. I'm a clinical assistant professor here at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. I work with elementary education as well as our literacy studies program.
I'm Jennifer Jordan. I am also part of the Theory and Practice and Teacher Education Department, and I work with elementary ed students as well as literacy students.
We're basically the same person. And so we're going to talk about developmental word study and tools to promote phonemic awareness, which actually we need to switch those because we're going to have Jennifer start with phonemic awareness and work our way into developmental word study. And so we've already introduced ourselves, and Jennifer's probably tired of seeing this little comic, but I love it so much because A, I think it's cute, and then also B, it's really kind of what we're getting at here. You know, when we're thinking about emergent readers and writers and thinking about kids who are ready to engage in literacy tasks, you know, we've all seen the little kid who's like, I'm not a reader yet. I don't read. I don't know how, what have you. Right now, I'm just a looker, but that we're hoping, and well, actually, we're not hoping. We know that the strategies and the different concepts and ideas that we're going to talk about this evening are ways that we can take literacy learners from being lookers to readers, consumers of written text. And so just kind of getting our brains warmed up, or just giving ourselves a second to think and make connections here. Just, you can jot it down, you can think in your brain, you can drop it in the chat, unmute, share with us, however you want to express this, but just thinking about what we already know about phonemic awareness, what we already know about phonics, what we already know about word study, and how you teach or practice these skills and sets of knowledge with your own children or with your own students. And we'll revisit this towards the end of our presentation and time together, and hopefully some of those sets of knowledge have changed and grown. And so thinking about our key concepts here, and this is, we had a session last week, so we're becoming familiar faces around the virtual literacy block. But some key concepts, some things to think about for the purposes of this presentation. Thinking about phonemic awareness, which Jennifer's going to talk to us a lot about, the alphabetic principle, phonics, word study, decoding, and automatic word recognition. All of these things we're going to get into in more detail as far as what they are, how to assess them, and ways to teach and practice those with literacy learners. But to kind of get us started, we're really thinking back to these 5 pillars of reading from way back when with the National Reading Panel report, which A, I can't believe it was 21 years ago, and B, I can't believe we still talk about it and use it as a framework. Like that's got to be some kind of world record in education. But we're really kind of thinking about these interactions, right? Not necessarily this lockstep progress from one to the next, but really how all of these components interact reciprocally to build and reinforce each other, and ultimately resulting in the idea of comprehension. And, you know, not just the idea of comprehension as far as I read this thing and now I understand it and I can tell you what it was about, but really engaging with the text to the level of which we can take new information, new knowledge, new understanding, and then do things with it, generate new ideas, right? Inform our ways of thinking and knowing and being. So it's really more than just I read it and I can answer these questions. And we also want to ground what we're doing and thinking about and how we teach and how we assess in some theoretical underpinnings here. And so we know that specifically in Knoxville, specifically in Tennessee, the simple view of reading has been kind of a hot topic in the past couple of years as a way to really think about and explain what reading is. And so thinking about this piece of decoding where we're really focused in on the print level skills, print processing, matching sounds to letters that represent them, so that we can take words off of the page. In conjunction with language comprehension, with our background knowledge, with our knowledge of vocabulary, so that we use those two large boxes, if you will, those two bigger umbrellas to think about how reading comprehension happens. In conjunction with the cognitive model here on the right-hand side. And I joke, I think I should probably have the cognitive model tattooed on me at some point by now, because I use it so frequently. I love visual representations. They just really help support my thinking. But also it just makes sense to me. And I think it captures these different pathways that again intersect and interact to result in reading comprehension. And this model is really helpful for thinking about assessment and identifying areas of strength and areas to strengthen for individual literacy learners. But I also think it really captures those interactions and how reading comprehension really it cannot happen if all of these smaller components are not interacting effectively and efficiently within the learners themselves. And so we're really focusing here on, yes, thank you, me too, visuals are so great. And so thinking about this pathway one, where we're tracking from that automatic word recognition, which is really the key, right? It's the cornerstone of reading, in my humble opinion. Well, it's one of them. And then tracking back to see, where these strengths and areas of areas to strengthen may occur. And so we'll really focus in on this pathway here. We'll talk a little bit about vocabulary knowledge when we're talking about word study, but we're really thinking about phonemic awareness, getting into phonics decoding, building sight word knowledge, fluent contextual reading, automatic word recognition, and then bringing all of this together. And so I will give the caveat that I do tend to rely very heavily on words their way. It's a lot to do with that. I used it a lot in my own classroom, but also that I feel like it's very teacher friendly. It's practitioner friendly. It's really helpful and accessible in a way that you can take this book and really get a pretty good grounding and understanding of the way that our oral English language works, in addition to how we map that oral language to written text. And so thinking about reading instruction and how word study, which, I tend to use the term word study and the terms word study, spelling, and even phonics kind of interchangeably, just to kind of give that context. But really thinking about how we use that, how we use engaging with and studying how spoken and written words work to develop the alphabetic principle. And then continuing to map sounds to written letters so that readers can decode. And through this paragraph here, we're really seeing, and we'll return to this, the way that develops in readers and writers of English. And again, resulting in that ability to efficiently and automatically and accurately recognize words.
All right, so I'm going to start in on phonemic awareness, and just to remind everybody the definition, we can do it in the dark, right? It's really about listening to sounds in words and thinking about the sounds that make up words. The activities we're going to show, if you want to go to the next slide, Nora, we're going to start talking about activities that actually do have words and sounds written down. And Nora and I had an interesting conversation the other day about what is phonemic awareness, what is phonics, and where do you draw the line? And the idea that phonemic awareness, it's okay if there's words and representation and graphemes that go along with it. You know, that's not where the emphasis is, but for those students who are ready to start making that connection, it's okay. So of course, you know, doing rhymes and chants and things like that are all wonderful phonemic awareness activities. But for those students that are ready for it, you could have it written down as well, so they could start making the connection between the sounds and the print. And so we've got some different assessments listed here, and also you can see just kind of the trajectory of generally how students begin to hear phonemes in words. And so we've got blending, where you're putting sounds together, and then segmentation, where you're taking them apart. You know, if you think about, it's much easier to break apart dog and house and to hear those two words than it is in the word big, b-i-g, because little people, children have heard the word dog, they've heard the word house, but we don't usually go b-i-g. And so going from just the phonemes to the onset and rhyme, so b and ig, and then to syllables, that's where you see them clapping in the classroom, and then thinking about compound words. And then of course, segmentation is taking them apart. So all great activities to do. Again, you don't have to have any materials. You can do it all as you're speaking and as you're you know, reading aloud.
Sorry, and I was gonna chime in here too, and thinking like kind of how Jennifer is explaining, you know, breaking these larger words apart just orally aligns perfectly with how we teach kids how to decode words in context, right? So if we can b-ig, once we have that grapheme attached to the phoneme, then we can do that in context. And just like multisyllabic words, right? If we can isolate the two parts of a compound word, or if we can isolate the individual syllables from those larger words orally, then we can transfer that knowledge to when we encounter much larger words in context.
And you just blew my mind, because I've never made this connection before, but the blending is decoding and the segmentation is encoding. So you blend to read and you segment to write.
All right, presentation over. Our work here is done. Jennifer learned something new.
I don't know why I've never thought about it that way, but that's cool.
Yeah, and I was thinking too, sorry to jump in here. I can't be quiet for too long. Jennifer and Zoe know that. But so thinking about this idea and our conversation that we had about, okay, so phonemic awareness versus phonics, and what are we doing? And that conversation kind of came from, we were talking about our own teaching, you know, when we were in the classroom. And I remember when I taught kindergarten and first grade, we had a very specific phonics program that we used. And I liked that program because the developmental sequence that we're going to talk about here in just a little bit, and that we're already talking about actually here, that program was very true to that, which was really helpful. But you know, we were required to teach it whole group. And so we were going through, you know, with fidelity through, you know, page 1 and on lockstep, which was also fine for the whole group time. And I was able to differentiate and have small groups that we were getting at, you know, more nuanced instruction or remediating, things like that. But one of my frustrations I was telling Jennifer with that program was that we spent weeks and weeks and weeks that per the manual, we were only doing phonemic awareness. So like our phonics time was 30 minutes and there was no print attached. It was all like singing and chanting, you know, and like tapping out these sounds, which is helpful. And a lot of kids need that instruction. But I started to think, okay, you know, I'm teaching this with kindergarten and first graders, and I know based on my assessments I've given that there are kids in here who are ready to spell. They are ready to map speech to print. So what can I do that follows what I'm required to do that I feel like a lot of my kids need, but that is also going to provide that extension and those opportunities for kids who are ready to read and write. And so that's what I did is, we may be segmenting bat and then generating hat, then cat, then sat orally. And it occurred to me, oh, well, I can show them on the whiteboard, right? And everyone can have their own whiteboard. And so we can do our phonemic awareness, we can do our phonological awareness activities while also kind of connecting speech to print. So I think that's something to really think about as far as what is effective and what makes the most sense for the kids in our classroom or the child in our home that we're working with. And really being thoughtful about knowing A, what they know, B, what they need to know, C, oh my gosh, I'm going to go all the way through the alphabet. I'm just kidding. But, thinking about the materials we have and then how we can best use those to support all the learners in our classroom. I was not expecting to talk that long. I apologize.
Is it my turn again?
No, you're done.
Oh, so thinking about the importance of letter and sound identification, obviously, as we're thinking about phonemic awareness being more sound-based, and letter identification being more grounded in, writing with the graphemes, and the importance of knowing which is which. I was reading something one of our interns was writing in her lesson plans this past week, and I thought it was interesting that in this particular county that we're teaching in, they're teaching the letter sounds before they're teaching the letter names. And the seasoned teachers who have been in those classrooms and done it both ways really like it this way, and they say that they're making a lot of progress. And so that's a little bit different than what we historically think of doing, right? We teach the alphabet song, we teach the names of the letters, we use the names of the letters to teach the sounds, but this is kind of flipping it and doing the sound. Let's hear the sounds first, and then we'll connect it to a squiggle on the page. So I thought that was interesting. And then thinking about how we're going to do instruction and practice. If we wanted to focus in, like, let's say on onset and rhyme, that's a pretty common one that you'll see in a classroom. I don't know if you're familiar with this book, I Ain't Gonna Paint No More, but thinking about and drawing attention to students to the pages, to the text, and it says, so I take out some red and I paint my head. And then he's gonna, oh, what the heck, it's going so well, I'm gonna paint my neck. And so bringing students, as they're hearing that, bringing their attention to it. But again, like Dr. Vines is saying, the written text is there for those children who are ready for it, ready to start to make those connections. If you don't have this book yet, I'm so bad with like directionality. Dolly Parton's Coat of Many Colors. It's got great rhyme in this one as well. And then of course, my favorite is Runny Babbitt Returns. And this one's all about word play. And if you know Pig Latin, Zoe, do you know what Pig Latin is? Is it something you've heard of before? Is that just like a...
Yes, we have our own version of that.
Okay.
But I had to learn it here too.
So taking words and moving around the sounds. And so this one here, I don't know if you can see the illustrations, but it's called Runny Snows Gorkling. It should be Runny Goes Snorkeling, but they switched out the onset. And it's Runny went brorkling in the snook, a guppy knit his bows, crabs bibbled on his nelly, a lobster tinched his pose. And I'll stop there, but just thinking about having your students listen and think about, okay, what is switched in that, right? If I can go ahead and segment it out and think of those sounds and then swap them and blend them back together, then that really is that foundation of moving into decoding and encoding. And then when we move into decoding, then we start doing these decodable type books, right? Where you've got the cat sat on the hat, in the rat, in the bat, whatever. This one is a riveting story about Hank. It goes, Hank drives his tank down the bank. Hank drives his tank along the plank. I don't know if these children would know what a plank is. Clank, clank, clank goes Hank's tank. So using what you know about onset and rhyme, as well as the student is being instructed in high frequency words, is then that next step into decodable readers. And when we think of decodable readers, I'm like, gosh, this is so engaging. It's the most amazing book ever. No, of course it's not, right? It's a stepping stone. So we need to be thinking about it as, there's a time and there's a place, and some students need to spend much longer time in decodable books, and some students can move through them very quickly and then be ready to read authentic literature. And again, it's just knowing your own students and having those professional decision making, if you have that power in your classroom. I know some classrooms you're tied to certain texts, certain programs, and that's fine. And again, there's definitely worth in decodable texts, but it's more of a piece of the pie. And for some kids, maybe it's a bigger piece, but for some kids, it's a smaller piece. And so just kind of, trying to make those decisions on how much. And then Dr. Vines, I'll let you talk about the alphabetic principle in our little video we have.
I will. First, Talitha, did I say your name correctly? I should have asked at the beginning.
Yeah, you did.
Okay, perfect. So Talitha had a question in the chat. And so she's asking excuse me, your thoughts are as far as emerging bilingual students. What do you think the pros and cons are for introducing sounds before letter names?
That's a great question. And I haven't had much time to think about it because, like I said, it's just kind of been brought to my attention. And I know there's been programs that have done that all along where the sounds come first. I like it because, what we're hearing is that the rhetoric that's out there, right, telling us the science of reading and what needs to happen is that there's not enough attention on the sounds, right? So students are using picture cues and other things, and they're not learning the sounds that the letters make. And so to me, maybe flipping the script and doing the sounds first makes sense. I mean, obviously there would still need to be instruction on the letter names, but I also know that some letter names get in the way, right? And so you're going to see that in a minute with this video. Our little friend here, when asked what sound the C makes, it's S. And it's like, yeah, sure, that's one of them, but that's not the most common sound that it makes. So if I was teaching the sounds of the letter C first, I would probably say it makes, this shape, this shape here makes the K sound, and I wouldn't get to the S for quite some time. I don't know. What do you think, Dr. Vines? Have you thought much about it?
I have. And so when I saw it in the chat, and when you were mentioning it, I had an initial first reaction. Mm-hmm. Then I stopped and I thought and I reflected and I had some of the similar things you were saying. So our little friend here is actually my 5-year-old, and I'm so glad he is old enough now that I can extort him and his literacy learning to use it for my own educational purposes. I've reached that point. But I was thinking about how, he has a very strong grounding in letter names. He can identify all the letters. But yeah, when we start doing the activity we're going to show here in a minute, he has C and he says S, and then also he always confuses like Y, because he says Y says what, right? Of course it does, because it's in its name. Now the way I've been taught and the way I understand development is that we have this letter name stage, right? Where kiddos use the sounds embedded in the names of letters to write words. So for example, you'll see kids write the ch digraph as the letter H. And if you ask a child, even when I asked George, what, can you help me spell this word? And he will go through the alphabet, A, B, C, D, until he lands on a letter that he either knows that's the sound that it represents, or that sound is embedded in the letter name, and then he uses that to approximate representing that sound. Anyway, all of that to say, in the 2 minutes since you asked your question, Talitha, I've also been reflecting and thinking, well, is that a natural developmental thing, or is it developmental because it's been constrained because we have forever introduced the letter names first? So I could see both sides, and I could make the argument on both sides there too, that I think it's important. I'm thinking through this as I'm talking, as I'm thinking, but also I'm thinking we make assumptions about kids coming to kindergarten and first grade that they already know the alphabet, that they have a grounding in letters before they even start school. So have we focused our instruction and tailored our instruction based on those assumptions we're making, that not all children are going to come to school with that grounding in letter names? So it's going to depend on your kids. Can I say that? It depends on
How
the
about,
that they
yeah,
bring.
and how about Dr. Vines and I do some more research, and we'll have a session on it in one of these talks.
Yeah, or I'd love to hear what Dr. Filipakos has to say, because I saw her unmute. So I'd love to hear her perspective as well.
You caught me when I muted.
I did. You can't escape me.
But I managed to contain myself. So the way to think of this is language, right? So you may have someone who is bilingual, trilingual, etc., but they need to be immersed in language. So if there is no, it makes no sense to just work on sounds if the child does not understand the word, right? So we need to make the clear here that the discussion on language and language play will also come with a lot of discussion on the meaning of the word, so that you will see in emerging bilingual classrooms print all over objects, and then constant repetition of the sounds and beginning sound, especially for these words, because you want to make sure that the child understands the word, not just working on the sound. But then, yes, they will understand the sound, they will understand the word, and then they will make the connection with the alphabet. Don't forget that in many cases, you may have children who are already readers in their language. So, and also don't forget the type of language, the system. So if it is orthographic, if it is alphabetic, I mean, if it's logographic or not, what type of language they come from. Because sometimes they may come from a language system, their background may be on a language system that it's very different from an alphabetic one, and they may not have specific sounds in their own language production. So all these come then with language play that plays a lot with what Dr. Jordan was showing, the books, and this constant repetition of the rhymes, of the words, of learning words. And then once the child understands how the system works, you will see jumps really in their production. Actually, we did a very small type of work with a colleague where we saw that the child jumped an entire stage. The letter name moved to the within word pattern because that child, she was speaking 2 languages, but she understood the system and she could already read in Russian. So it was, once she figured out the system and that, oh, this letter makes that sound that I know from that other language, it was easy to transfer. So in the case of, I will agree, yes, it has to do with the child, where the child is, and then what the child's linguistic background and what's the child's origin of language is. And then please allow in schools translanguaging, because we know that it supports so much their development as writers and as spellers and as learners. And then also it supports comprehension. And we know code switching we speak about it all the time in reading comprehension as well as in language production, and vocabulary understanding, but code switching and that translanguaging also has its role in spelling.
Thank you. It should be at least 3 of us in every presentation to bring all these perspectives. And thank you, Talitha, because I mean, your question obviously got us all thinking and reflecting like on the fly. I'm ready to go have a conversation with the 4 of you somewhere else for the next 3 hours to work through this. And thank you, Dr. Philippakos, for jumping in. I'm sorry we like threw you on the spot. So Jennifer shared some books there, and then I love this book, How Rocket Learned to Read. I love dogs, and it's just super cute. It really illustrates the alphabetic principles so beautifully. This little bird comes and she wants to teach the dog how to read, and he's like, "Ugh, I'm a dog, leave me alone." But she hooks him with this beautiful read aloud about a dog who's looking for his lost bone, and so he races to her little classroom, and she's gone. And the next day, he's like waiting. He's like, "I'm ready to be your student." And she introduces him to the glorious, mighty, wonderful alphabet where it all begins. And she explains to him how let these letters from the alphabet represent sound, and then they start to build words one at a time. And he spells everything. He spells his friends' names, and he spells the sounds that this one dog makes, grr. And it's just such a lovely introduction to what the alphabetic principle is. Because I think another piece of this conversation too is that, we teach the alphabet song and we say, here are the names of these letters and here are the sounds they make, but we're never explicit about the alphabet being a tool, right? It's a tool that we use to represent our spoken language, and to interact in that way and to express ourselves in that way. And so I think that book does a really nice job of that, and I just love it. Anyway, and so thinking about this idea of letter identification. This is my 5-year-old. It's a little 2-minute clip, but this is something that we do. We've been doing at home, and actually, I took for granted and assumed that he had a lot of knowledge and was ready to start doing some word study. And we started doing it a little bit, and then I realized like he's got some missing stuff here as far as not knowing some letters and their associated sounds. So I needed to back him up to really start to fill in some of those gaps. Poor guy with a reading teacher mom. And so just kind of want to walk us through like what we do here. And there's a lot going on. It's not just this letter is this, but you'll see that we have a pile of capital letters, we have a pile of lowercase letters. And so he is identifying the name of the letter as a capital, and then he matches it to a lowercase, and then I ask him to produce the sound that it makes. And it's just the first couple of letters because as Jennifer was saying, we got a little colorful language when we got into the letter C, and so I had to stop recording and edit that out. It was highly entertaining for me, not appropriate for here. Anyway, so this is just an example of one way to work on letter sound identification, and I'll start it and hopefully the sound is okay.
Okay, George, we have the uppercase letters. Can you point to the uppercase letters, the capital letters for me?
This one.
Yes. And where are the lowercase letters?
This one.
Excellent. And which letter do you want to start with? You can start with any one you like.
And A,
Okay.
which is the star.
Okay.
I got it.
All right.
A's look like this.
Yes. There's your capital A. Now, can you match it to your lowercase a? Good job. Excellent. You told me the name of this letter. Do you know?
And uppercase, lowercase one looks like this.
Perfect. Can you tell me the sound that letter makes?
Ah.
Good job. Perfect.
Now for a B.
Find the B.
Found it.
Ooh. Good work. It's the
Now,
uppercase B. I want you to check that. It looks very similar to a B.
a P.
If you turn it upside down, it's a P. This letter, look, it goes this way. That's a D. Can you find?
Okay, I'm gonna stop it there just in the interest of time. But so he picked up a D, and then he picked up a P, and then so we talked through what his, how he had kind of transposed those, and then he eventually found the B and he made the B sound. And so just kind of an example of ways that you can work on letter identification in addition to the sounds that they represent. All right, and so moving into word study. And so thinking about building once we have the alphabetic principle and we're working on phonemic awareness, but thinking about the use of a spelling inventory. And we have one here that was actually completed by a fairly advanced reader, but we have one a little later that we're going to look at that's from a kindergartner. But thinking about using spelling inventories, seeing the knowledge that kids have of letter sound connections. And I even encourage folks that I work with, and I would give a spelling inventory at the beginning of kindergarten, maybe just the first 5 words of the primary inventory, and this is from Words Their Way, but just to get an idea of what kiddos already know about written language and how to represent that. And I really feel like this is also a good evaluation of phonemic awareness as well, because as we've talked about, if you're not hearing the sounds, if you're not able to manipulate those sounds, segment those sounds, you're not, for the most part, going to be able to represent them with their with the letter that represents that sound, if you will. And so here's the sample kindergarten inventory, which is from a real kid. And so just kind of looking here, and anybody can chime in, but thinking about what insight we can get from a child's phonemic awareness from looking at the way they have represented these words and spelling.
I cannot control myself and not
Please,
speak.
please.
And especially when there is a question on on the analysis of data. It's
Yeah,
like,
yeah, I know.
so I would say that he has the ability to differentiate on 3 phonemes. So we can see that he struggles significantly with holding the 4th on his working memory. That's why he misses the blends. But he is using but confusing the vowel sounds. So there is a confusion on the I and E, which is not uncommon, between the A and U, which is not uncommon. So this is a very common type of errors that the child is making. And I really like the error with a VAT, because that is a voice on voice that we see as a mistake, where it's the v and v, and it's very common for them to make that mistake, that error. I was happily impressed that he didn't make the BDP, because that's something that follows, so that's fine. And then the ch, so he doesn't have blends, he doesn't have digraphs. He's working with CVC words, and he's using but confusing the short vowel. So I would say that instruction would begin with short vowel sounds, so that he can differentiate those. But he's such a nice case, clear.
I know, it's so nice. And this is taken from a kiddo that I have like data across the kindergarten year, and this child came into kindergarten and could not write his name yet. He didn't know any letter names or letter sounds. And this is, I think this is from March of that kindergarten year. So he went from coming into kindergarten not having grounding in letter names or sounds, and then grew this much with instruction. So yes, it's very clear cut, which is not always the case. So he did us a favor here.
May I just say one thing too, that and I know that Dr. Jordan makes that comment in her sessions, as well as you too, the transcription. So the power of handwriting and the value of handwriting too, because in this case, he wrote hit, right, for hot. Mm-hmm. But because he didn't make that little line a bit higher, it counted as knit. And we see that with handwriting often, when they don't know how to make the automatic formation of the letter, how that affects their productivity and their meaning as well when they write. So that this transcription and sounds and phonics, they all go so well together, and they are so important in early grades too.
Absolutely. And we talk so much about reading fluency that I think what you're getting at there too is writing fluency, right? If we're struggling so hard to form this letter, that how much is lost, how, again, your working memory, how much can you hold on to produce if you're getting hung up by that physical piece of the puzzle, if you will, which is yet another reason writing can be so much more difficult and complex than that receptive piece of reading. And thinking about Talitha's question earlier, I think, and what you were just saying, Dr. Philippakos, like, you know, especially if you're thinking about dialect and pronunciation and the way that people speak, you know, especially I think about trying to teach a class of kiddos the difference between I and eh. I'm Southern. They're the same, right? A pen is a pen is a pen, you know. So those are things to also keep in mind of why those errors are happening, and thinking about, you know, how do we expose kids to the conventional spelling so that they are able to differentiate between it and even if it sounds the same. And so these developmental stages here, thinking about these predictable stages, and we've already troubled some of this a little bit with that letter name alphabetic stage, and that's going to keep me up at night. I'm just telling you that right now. And so just thinking about how each stage builds upon the other. And Talitha, I know you put in the chat that you also like words their way. So we're speaking your language here, but like Dr. Philippakos was saying, you know, that using but confusing piece. So we want to be really thoughtful and aware of what our students know and what they've mastered as they work through these developmental stages, and we support them and meet them instructionally in these stages so that we're not rushing them through in a way that creates these holes and gaps, to where, you know, we may be still using but confusing these short vowels, but we've nailed the blends and diagraphs, right? So being sure that we're working towards mastery with these sets of knowledge and skills. And this is just, I love this handout. It's just another way to show development. And I love that it's a one-piece thing where we have the example word on the left-hand side. And then as we move through those developmental stages, there are examples of how a literacy learner would represent these words in their own writing, from that random letter string all the way to the conventional spelling of the word. And I don't remember if we said this, but we will post the PowerPoint to our website when it is up and running along with this presentation. And so thinking about instruction here, we just have some points. I'm not going to read through them all, but just these principles of good word study instruction. And you can see our concepts here of developing the alphabetic principle, developing phonemic awareness, a strong foundation in the letters, right? So again, back to that question and thinking about when it's appropriate to bring letters and sounds together, that phonics piece. You know, we can't just teach letter names and expect kids to approximate, but we also can't get mired down in only working on sounds and phonemic awareness, because I think a lot of times we want to work in this lockstep linear fashion, like Dr. Jordan was talking about earlier, as far as like, well, first we're gonna understand the sounds, and then once we get all the sounds, then we'll bring the print. It doesn't work that way. It's all reciprocal, and it all comes together to build that knowledge and skill. And so I really think that grounding in the sound and the letters is key. The way that we present word study, you know, we don't need to memorize. It doesn't need to be boring. We don't need to use a bunch of worksheets, right? We can use real authentic activities like you see here on the left-hand side, so that kids are engaged with letters and sounds and words in isolation. But then again, as Dr. Jordan was saying towards the beginning, also in these authentic contexts, whether they're decodable readers or whether they're real books that we're either reading to kids, we're reading with kids, or that they're reading on their own. And I know Dr. Jordan also said this, you know, we're really thinking about this as one part of a reading program, but really bringing it all together so that for that authentic reading and writing.
I assume this is me. So the non-negotiables, just thinking about just pulling it all together. For all this to work, you as a teacher need to have linguistic knowledge. So an understanding of the connection between the letters and the sounds, and then the spelling patterns that typically go with those sounds. Need to be evaluation experts. So understanding what you're looking at. So like Dr. Philippakos was able to look at that spelling inventory and know what it meant, right? So to make instructional decisions based off of that. Obviously, we need to differentiate, which I know sometimes can be difficult, especially if you are given, a set of texts and it's like the principal says, I'm going to walk in at 10:30 on Tuesday and you better be reading this book. We know that some programs use a lot of whole group, everybody on the same page. The expectation is grade level text. And again, that's great, but we also know from research that we need to meet students where they are as well. So it's not a problem to give them materials that are too hard to help them, expand their vocabulary or for whatever purpose, but to have them in those texts all day in a frustration zone, it doesn't make sense. So again, the balance of that. And thinking about organizational routines. So how are you going to organize your classroom to be able to do all of these activities, especially if you are differentiating? How are you going to use small groups? How are you going to pair students up to work together with word study? And of course, we want to make all of this as authentic as possible. So making that connection, which I think is the next slide, making that connection between reading and writing. So if they are learning to spell these words, then a great activity would be to have them go do a word hunt in their reading book, in their level text, so that they are seeing the connection as to why do I need to know how to spell these words? Oh, because if I know how to spell them, then I know the sounds. And so then therefore it makes it easier to read this word as well as other words that have the same pattern. And just obviously being critically reflective, always thinking about what is working, what's not working, what do I need to change? And we came up with this term, a pedagogy of messiness. And so that idea that I was presented with when I first started teaching, where we had a reading story that we would do each week. And on Monday, we would introduce it. And by Friday, we would be testing on it. And it didn't matter if you didn't get it because the next week there was another story. So just embracing that idea that some things are going to take longer than others, and it doesn't all have to finish on Friday. And some kids are going to take longer than others, and some kids are going to be way over here. And that's our job as teachers, is to be able to negotiate and navigate all of that going on in the classroom, even though sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming. And so then, yeah, the reciprocal relationship, we know from research that learning the sounds and learning the letters, and we can go back and forth on which one makes sense to do first and which one makes sense to do next. But if they're not experiencing those words, there's those letters and those sounds and making words in actual books, so they're not seeing them in books, they're not being asked to write those words and write sentences, maybe in response to what they're reading, then they're not going to grasp and they're not going to be able to master decoding and encoding as quickly as if we provide them with authentic reasons to read and to write, which is also very motivating, which also helps. So questions, thinking back to the very beginning where we thought about what did we already know. I know you've already asked a bunch of great questions, but what other, and I think that Dr. Vines and I both have, I don't know if we have new understandings, we have new queries, things we're thinking about, new ideas, but is there anything else that you'd like for us to discuss, or anything you'd like to share with us?
Well, I work with older students, so middle ages, sixth and eighth grade. I'm an instructional coach for middle school. And one of the struggles I've had over the past few years is I have students who are in special ed and almost in the emergent phase of reading. And so what are some, I've used Words Their Way, I've done things like that, but what are some, do you have other suggestions to help those students? Because they're in the classroom, they're doing Great Minds, Wit and Wisdom, and they're very overwhelmed.
So Jennifer is in our literacy lab here on campus, and she has amassed all of these amazing resources. So that's where she got up to go and find these resources. That's what she's doing.
I wasn't mad at your question.
Yeah.
Are
Yeah.
you familiar with the You Read to Me, I Read to You books?
No.
There's a whole series of them, and they're really for fluency. But what I like about them, it might work for your kids. I don't know. They may think they're too babyish, but basically, you know, you've got text on one side that is written for one student to read, and then text on the other side for the other student to read. So they're able to read in pairs, and it's color coded, so they know what to say. And then there's another series that I'm going to go look for, but I'm not sure if I'm going to find it. In which it's the same type of thing where you open up the text, but I think they're usually like science topics. And like, let's say this page would be written on a 6th grade level, but then this page is written on a 2nd grade level. And then you turn it again and it's like 6th grade and 2nd grade. So it's the idea that you could have students read it together, and it would be, you know, on different levels. So.
Well,
And I would say too, Talitha, like something, and it's going to depend on your kiddos, but if you can get them to write themselves or to write with you in interactive writing or shared writing and generating text that they have authored or co-authored with you or with a partner or with other folks in their classroom, that is also a really good instructional tool for just practicing writing, but also then using their own writing as a text to read, so that you can support them in acquiring more sight word knowledge, if that makes sense. And then for the most part, they should be able to read what they've written themselves. So I would suggest something like that as well, if you have the time and space to do writing like that.
okay. I like that idea.
I can't find the differentiated books, but in a second, we're going to show a slide with our email addresses. And if you are interested in knowing the title of that, you can email either one of us. And when I get to my office, I can send you the name of this. It's a whole series of books.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I would.
Yeah, I was gonna say I work with a 6th grade student who sounds very similar to your kiddos, and that has been an issue with him over the past couple years. Is that, you know, he gets pulled out for intervention, but then he gets intervention with stuff that he doesn't actually need, and then he misses the stuff that he needs in his regular classroom, and so. He has actually responded to those I read to you, you read to me, like 2 voice poems, things like that. And I mean, and you have probably already done this, but just asking your kids what they're interested in and what they want to read will go a long way. Like, I remember the first time I sat down with this particular kiddo, and he told me, he said, I prefer reading picture books because I can't visualize what I'm reading. And so those give me a support. And so even though he's in 6th grade, he will always choose the picture book over anything else to read because he knows himself so well as a reader. Now, of course, I'm not going to let him read picture books every single time. Like, he's got to build up to reading text without picture supports. But that may also be a good and motivating way to get at what they want to read, and trying to find that balance between what they want to read and what they can read, and then where you can support them to growing.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
Yes.
Can I ask if you're here locally? Are you in the Knoxville area?
I am in Anderson County.
Oh, we
So-
work in Anderson County.
Yeah. Norris Middle is where I'm at. Yeah.
We have interns at Norris Elementary.
Do you?
Yes.
So-
2 of my interns were from UT.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it's our fault. It's our interns who aren't teaching your students to read by the time they get there. I got it. Okay. We'll talk to them about it.
We'll tell them. We'll tell them now, tomorrow. We'll send them nasty emails. Well, we're so glad you came, and thank you again. Like, these are the times that I love doing stuff like this, where I'm like, oh man, I haven't thought this deeply or reflected on my such deeply held beliefs in so long. It's uncomfortable, and I love it. So thank you for your questions and pushing us. It's been great. So we're continuing the series. We're doing this the second, third, and fourth Tuesday of every month. The Zoom link is the same. And so we've just kind of got some promotional stuff here. Coming up next month, we'll have a professor here in our department who is an expert on dyslexia. She'll be here to share. Another special ed colleague will be here to present on RTI squared here in Tennessee. And then we have another colleague who'll be focusing on fluency building strategies. And then we have a wide array of experts and topics across the next few months through June. So we would love to see you again. We would love to see you come and make all of our colleagues, like, put them on their toes, and send your colleagues too. We're trying to grow this series and just share the things we know and learn together with folks in the community.
Is Amber, is it Bingham? Is she still teaching at Norris?
She is now, she's also an academic coach like I am, and she's at Norwood Middle.
Okay, well, tell her that we'll be expecting her because she needs to learn these things.
Yeah, I will. I actually am going to tell my teachers about this.
Yes,
great.
please.
Be awesome. Where can they locate the information? Did you say the website?
Our website is not up and running yet. It's surprisingly difficult to get a website going with so many constraints. I think if we were allowed to, Dr. Philippakos would have built that website months ago and just like put it up there, but we've got all these barriers. But if you follow the College of Education, Health, and Human Sciences, or Theory and Practice in Teacher Education, or Dr. Philippakos or Jennifer on Twitter or on Facebook or Instagram or lots of different
places.
Yeah.
How did you hear about this one?
I actually heard it through my master's program at ETSU.
Awesome.
So they posted it there at our class. So I'm glad I came.
Do you have Dr. Ward?
Yes, I do. Yes.
I texted her last week and I was like, come, and she was like, I'm too busy, but I'll tell everybody I know.
Yeah.
So good. I'll have to text her in a little bit. That's awesome. Well,
Yeah.
I'm so glad you came. So here is our contact information. There's Jennifer's and mine. I'm going to stop sharing. Did you get that? I'm sorry. Jennifer, will you put your in the chat?
Yeah.
I think I got it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to stop sharing. We do have a Google form. If you don't mind to just give us some feedback on the session.
Oh, yeah.
There are several questions there. I'll drop it in the chat. So if you don't mind to just fill out that form for us. And then here's my email as well. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us. It was a pleasure to meet you and learn with you, and we hope you will be back.
I plan on it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great night.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.